The Biden administration is recruiting the private sector to impose forced COVID requirements and social media censorship. And there's a name for this merger of the state and the private sector: fascism. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
A specter is haunting America, the specter of fascism. Now, fascism is not the same thing as Nazism. When we think of fascism, we often think of Hitler's regime in Germany. And Hitler's regime was, in a sense, fascist, but it added all these new elements, including a kind of systematic anti-Semitism, a targeting of Jews. That was not part of original fascism. Mussolini, for example, had very little to do with any of that. Mussolini is the quintessential fascist. And fascism, in its quintessential meaning, is the kind of merger of the state and the corporate sector to achieve a kind of unifying socialist goal. Now, in fascist regimes, there was a private sector. Unlike in the Soviet Union or Cuba, the government didn't nationalize or take over the private sector, but it mobilized the private sector. It controlled the private sector. It cajoled the private sector into doing what the state wanted. And we're seeing this happen in America today. We're seeing the creation of, you could almost call it a shadow state. This is a term that the political scientist Jonathan Turley uses, a shadow state, referring to the government working in kind of tandem with private corporations, with private media companies, to do things that the government itself is forbidden from doing, to impose coercion, including censorship, on people that the government itself can't do. Now, here's Jen Psaki, the press secretary, talking about social media censorship and how the Biden administration's collaboration with Facebook to get people banned for, quote, misinformation or disinformation is insufficient. There needs to be a comprehensive regime of censorship. Listen.
So you shouldn't be banned from one platform and not others for providing misinformation out there.
And there it is. They want you to become, in a sense, a nonperson. You have a point of view, and you can maybe tell your neighbor about it, but you have no way to express it. Now, on COVID, which is becoming the pretext for the Biden administration to do this, they're also recruiting corporations to impose not just mask requirements, but forced vaccines. And there are all kinds of ways that they can do this. Here is, by the way, the head of Morgan Stanley. And he basically says, look, we've been allowing people to stay home and work from home. And but now we're going to require that if you come into work, you're vaccinated. And if you're not vaccinated, well, you can stay and work from home. But he says you're not going to be paid, quote, New York rates. He goes, you can't live in Colorado and receive New York rates. So in other words, you're going to be paid less if you're not vaccinated. You can still work for the company, but you're going to pay a penalty for doing it. The CNN medical analyst Leanna Wen was recently talking about how society should, quote, make it hard for people to remain unvaccinated. So she's talking about things like denying people access to travel, or to maybe eat in certain restaurants, or go to movie houses, schools. So you can see here how the plan here is for the government to enlist, you may almost call it the private institutions of society, the nonprofit sector, the corporate sector, and then the media sector, to collaboratively pursue this regime of coercion. Now, on the social media front and on the digital media front, it becomes even more worrisome, because you have to remember that it's one thing for a corporation to say, you have to be vaccinated. It's kind of difficult to get all corporations to say the same thing. But with the digital media companies, well, there's only a handful of them. And they are by and large already working in close tandem with the Biden administration. So remember that these are not ordinary businesses. They were created as neutral platforms of communication between people. They were given special immunity from lawsuits on that basis. And yet these corporations, having established virtual monopolies, are now essentially rigging the democratic process. On not just, by the way, on COVID, but on climate change, on gender identity, on election fraud. Public health is only one of the issues. And look, what can happen here is that you have citizens who essentially don't go along and they become non-persons. You can't work over here, you can't eat over there, you can't go see a movie, you can't express yourself on social media. So you, in a sense, disappear in your own society as a citizen. And by citizen, I mean someone who has a voice in the public square, because these digital platforms are the public square. Now, it may seem that I'm being a little bit maybe cavalier in using the term fascism here, but I'm not, because fascism at its core is exactly what we are now seeing. It's an American form of fascism, but it's fascism nonetheless. And we see this not just with the kind of overt observation that the government is working with the private sector. But if we look at one of the key thinkers of fascism, Giovanni Gentile, this is the guy, by the way, whom Mussolini ordained as the sort of prophet of fascism. And he was a member of parliament in Italy. Essentially, Gentile contrasts two types of democracy. The first one, he says, is the democracy in which it's a democracy of individuals. These individuals come together and form a society, and the point of the society, the purpose of it, is to protect the rights of those individuals. But Gentile goes, that's not what we're after. We are after a different conception of society in which the state comes first. The collective comes first. Society precedes the individual. Society forms the individual, and the individual is always beholden to society. And then what, says Gentile, is the kind of captain of society? Who is piloting the ship? Answer, it's the state. So the state becomes the sole authentic representative of society, and the state is therefore justified in recruiting the institutions of society to become its deputies in carrying out its mission, its educational mission. So its mission not only of education and indoctrination, Gentile doesn't hesitate to use the word, but establish coercion throughout the society. Because what are you doing, says Gentile? Nothing more than taking these isolated individuals and kind of whipping them into shape and making them subordinate to what they should be subordinate to, which is the singular purpose of the fascist state. Now, interestingly, if I were to just describe this, not saying fascism, not mentioning Gentile, to a group of people in the Biden administration, they'd probably be nodding their heads vigorously. Yeah, this is awesome, Dinesh. Where did you come up with this? Who thought of this stuff? This stuff is really the kind of silent spirit that informs what we're doing. And yes, it is. It is, in fact, the fascist strain in American progressivism now showing its ugly dictatorial face. We're going a little bit towel crazy in the D'Souza household. We just can't stop ordering MyPillow towels. Now, we've got some for every bathroom, and now Mike Lindell has a special that we can't pass up. So we're going towel nuts and ordering more. You can't have too many towels. Now, towels these days, the ordinary towels, just don't seem to dry you that well anymore. They feel soft and lotiony in the store, but you take them home and they don't absorb. Well, why not? Because towel companies typically import the product and then they add softeners that make the towel feel good, but they don't dry you very well. Now, Mike Lindell has solved this problem. He created the best towel company right here in the USA. MyPillow has proprietary technology to create towels that not only feel soft, but actually absorb and leave you feeling fresh and dry. MyPillow towels come with the MyPillow 60-day money-back guarantee. And for a limited time, Mike Lindell is offering a ridiculously good deal on his 6-piece towel set. Now, this set includes 2 bath towels, 2 hand towels, and 2 washcloths. They're made with USA cotton. They're soft yet absorbent. And here's the best part. They're regularly $109.99. And Mike is offering them for $39.99. So here's how you get them. Call 800-876-0227 or go to mypillow.com, but make sure to use promo code Dinesh. Again, the number 800-876-0227 or go to mypillow.com. Either way, don't forget to use promo code DINESH, Dinesh. You know, I'm really happy to welcome back to the podcast journalist extraordinaire Laura Loomer. The left has tried to make Laura a sort of a non-person in our society, but not on this podcast. Laura, welcome. Thanks for coming back on. I want to actually start by talking about what has made you so famous and also to some infamous, which is the Loomerisms, your Loomer journalistic technique. So can you talk to us about a couple of your journalistic hits, but also talk about the style that informs them? Because the kind of stuff you do, I don't see really anyone else doing. So talk about your style of journalism.
Well, thank you so much for having me on again. And so I got my career started working as an undercover journalist with Project Veritas. And then when I left Project Veritas, I decided that I wanted to do more gonzo, guerrilla, in-your-face journalism, where I was confronting high-profile leftist politicians and celebrities and holding them accountable. And that's what I became known for. I built a following of millions of people online by, taking my cell phone and live streaming video confrontations, asking people like Hillary Clinton, James Comey, Linda Sarsour, Ilhan Omar, and Bill Clinton, the questions that the media has refused to ask, but the American people want answers to. And so, a lot of it was also very performative. Sometimes I would do performance art like demonstrations to really make a point. When I was banned from Twitter for calling Ilhan Omar anti-Jewish, I handcuffed myself to Twitter to raise awareness about social media censorship.
Now, Laura, talk about the fact that this is the kind of thing. And recently, if I remember, you confronted Jack Dorsey, the head of Twitter, at the Bitcoin conference. And you, I think, rightly embarrassed him a little bit because this was a crowd that he wanted to cater to. He wanted to seem cool. Right. So by challenging him, but talk about the importance of this gonzo style, because I think it doesn't come naturally to Republicans or to the right. So talk a little bit about your personality that is seemingly suited to this and what you're hoping to accomplish.
Yeah, so the whole point of Loomering when I invented it was to really use the Alinsky style tactics against the left, right? Use their own rules against them. Make the enemy live up to their own standards by holding them accountable by their own rules. And while we have a First Amendment right to peacefully protest, Republicans, for the most part, have really shied away from utilizing their right to protest. And so you see the left oftentimes utilizing their First Amendment right to carry out demonstrations. But it's time for the right to reclaim culture. And politics is downstream from culture. And so it's a really effective way by using their tactics against them. And that's what more Republicans need to do, because, if people haven't noticed, we're not exactly winning the culture war. The left is much better at organizing and being confrontational. And there's nothing wrong with confrontational. I built an entire brand around it. And you're right, I did confront Jack Dorsey recently at a Bitcoin conference, because Bitcoin is all about decentralization and freedom. And how is the king of censorship, Jack Dorsey, as I like to call him, promoting Bitcoin, right? It completely undermines the values around Bitcoin and what it means as a digital currency. And so even though I was deplatformed, right, it trended on Twitter, and it got its attention. And I'm raising awareness about election interference. I was the first deplatformed candidate in United States history. Then it happened to Donald Trump, as I predicted. And really, it's a cautionary tale. And what has happened to me can and will happen to every other American. If they're able to deplatform a sitting U.S. president while he's, still technically president, they're going to be able to deplatform anybody. And so that's really what I have continued doing, is raising awareness. And I'm not going to allow for my deplatforming to silence my voice. I have a book coming out called Loomered, How I Became the Most Banned Woman in the World, where I talk about how this happened and what has happened to me can and will happen. I talk about the history of deplatforming and how it's being weaponized and how we're seeing history repeat itself, right? These are the same tactics that were used in Nazi Germany in the time leading up to the Holocaust. The Holocaust didn't begin with shoving Jews in gas chambers and putting people in concentration camps. It began with a coordinated effort with the media and the state, with propaganda to dehumanize a segment of society, to debank them, to make them unpersons or untouchables in society, exactly what the Democrats are trying to do to Republicans and conservatives. And then they whipped up a frenzy and convinced large segments of society that it was okay to dehumanize and eventually mass murder millions of people. And that's what we're seeing in our country right now, especially with the regime of Joe Biden trying to force people to take vaccines, working with these so-called private companies like Facebook to censor people. And you have the White House openly admitting now, right, because we're in an opposition government, openly admitting that they're making lists of people to target and go after and asking social media companies to silence their political opposition.
You talked to me a little bit offline before the show about just the feeling of being a non-person in America. And by that I mean you've been a public figure and yet you've been not just banned from social media platforms, you've been banned in ways that people could barely begin to enumerate. So talk a little bit about all the different places that you're banned, but more importantly, I want you to talk kind of candidly about the experience of being a public non-person in America.
Yeah, well, we live in a digital era now, and I just turned 28 years old. And so my entire generation grew up really in this digital era. And everything in my generation really revolves around social media and the internet. And, I went to college. I was valedictorian. I had a 4.0 GPA. I have a degree in journalism, and I've had, a great journalistic career thus far. But I've been handicapped from really practicing my own profession because you can't really be a journalist in this day and age if you have no access to, basic forms of communication where everybody else is communicating. And so it's a very depressing lifestyle. I feel very lonely a lot of the time. It's very inconvenient. I can't even use payment processors. They say, oh, well, go make your own website. I made my own website. I can't monetize because Google won't allow me to have Google ads. And then, Word ads goes through PayPal. And so when you're banned on PayPal, you can't even monetize your site. And people tend to forget about you. And then they slander you and they defame you and they call you things like Nazi, anti-Muslim, white supremacist. And I have no way to fight back because I'm silenced. And so half the world thinks that I'm, some raging KKK, loving white supremacist, Muslim hater, when the reality is I was simply banned for, speaking out about Ilhan Omar's anti-Semitism and exposing the fact that she married her brother when Republicans were calling it a conspiracy theory. Now we all know that all of my reporting has checked out to be true. I've also been debanked, just like you were. I had my Chase online banking shut down. I've been illegally red flagged by the FBI after confronting James Comey at his book signing. And I've been banned by the FBI from being able to own a firearm, even though I've never committed a felony or been deemed mentally, unfit by a judge. So, I can't protect myself. I can't participate in society or communicate with my peers. And, people just tend to forget you when you're not online. It's really hard to make a living too, because like I said, went to school for a journalism degree. And it's not like you can go get a 9-to-5 job when someone can Google search you. And, 90% of prospective employers have been found to Google or do background checks on people they hire. And what does it say about me? It says I'm a dangerous individual or that, I'm a monster. So it's very hard. It's a very hard lifestyle, and not to mention I've spent pretty much all of my money on lawsuits fighting against big tech and trying to take these people on. And it's not like the Republican Party has really been helpful. I ran for Congress last election cycle. And even though President Trump endorsed me and voted for me, right? Because he lives and votes in Palm Beach County where I ran for Congress and I'm running again, the Republican Party still wouldn't help me. But they constantly talk about cancel culture, right? But they refuse to acknowledge the most censored woman in the country, or even, it's not just about me, right? They refuse to acknowledge what is happening to people just because they don't like some of the things that they previously said, or they have, preconceived notions or beliefs because they're reading Wikipedia.
Well, honestly, if Rosa Parks is the symbol of civil rights in America, or one of the symbols of civil rights in America, I think you've become the face of civil liberties, because when it first happened to you, a lot of people were like, well, that's just Laura Loomer. But now we're beginning to see that the exact same patterns are metastasizing out into the whole society. And I think it's probably accurate to say that no American can feel or should feel safe. Let's close out, Laura, by just telling people about your book. When does it come out, and how can people pre-order it now? How can we get it?
Yeah, and I also want to give you credit too, because you were one of the first really, big conservatives with a major platform to speak out about this when other people were trying to say that people like me and Alex Jones deserve to be banned. I mean, years ago, right? You were one of the only people who stood by me when I handcuffed myself to Twitter, and you've gone on Fox and utilized your brand to speak out about how absurd it is that ISIS can have Facebook and Twitter, but conservative Americans can't. So I appreciate everything you're doing as well. And I write about you in my book as well. It's called Loomered, How I Became the Most Banned Woman in the World. It comes out on October 5th, and it's available for pre-order. So you can pre-order your copy from Barnes & Noble and other online retailers as well. And when it comes out, I'll also have signed copies available. So if you want to read about cancel culture and support my work and hear my story, and hear about the war on free speech in America and our elections, I encourage you to read my book.
Hey, thanks very much, Laura, for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Did you know that 1/3 of Americans regularly suffer from nausea? My wife Debbie had a terrible time flying.
I really dreaded flying, but about 15 years ago, I found this great device that took away my nausea, and I won't go on an airplane without it anymore. I also use it for hormone-related vertigo, and actually within minutes, the nausea went away.
And that device is Relief Band. Now, Relief Band is the #1 FDA-cleared anti-nausea wristband. It's been clinically proven to quickly relieve and effectively prevent nausea and vomiting associated with motion sickness, anxiety, migraine, hangover, morning sickness, chemotherapy, and so much more. The product is 100% drug-free, non-drowsy, and provides all natural relief with zero side effects for as long as needed. The technology was originally developed over 20 years ago in hospitals to relieve nausea from patients, but now, through Relief Band, it's available to you. Relief Band stimulates a nerve in the wrist that travels to the part of the brain that controls nausea. Then it blocks the signal your brain is sending to your stomach telling you that you are sick. It makes a great gift for that special person in your life that suffers from nausea.
Thanks, honey. Love it. It's worked for me, and I know it can work for all of you.
Hey, as you're getting ready to take that summer road trip, hopping on the boat, or you're just anxious about heading back to the office, we've got good news. Right now, Relief Band has an exclusive offer just for my listeners. If you go to reliefband.com and use promo code Dinesh, you'll get 20% off plus free shipping and a no questions asked 30-day money-back guarantee. So again, head to reliefband.com and use our promo code Dinesh for 20% off plus free shipping. The Olympics, the Summer Olympics, begins this weekend. It begins tomorrow is the opening ceremonies. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to the Olympics. I've been a fan of track and field and all the different Olympic sports for decades now. I think the first Olympics I watched sitting in my living room in Mumbai in a black and white TV was the '76 Olympics, just a couple of years before I came to America. Now, for the first time, we might see, and mainly coming from America, a kind of nasty politicization of the Olympics. We have some hints of that already. The BMX, the freestyle rider Chelsea Wolfe, who said that her goal was to, quote, burn a flag on the podium if she won a medal. Wow. Think of the message that would send to the world. This would be unthinkable and unallowable in any other country, I think it's fair to say. Helmet thrower Gwen Berry, when she heard the national anthem play, and she was, in fact, standing on the podium at the Olympic trials, she immediately sort of turned away from the flag and held up a T-shirt basically saying activist athlete. I guess it was her way of repudiating the flag. And then, of course, there's the infamous Megan Rapinoe, the kind of self-anointed spokeswoman for the U.S. women's soccer team. And there's a kind of repulsive photo, the first game between the United States and Sweden, a game that the U.S. team was supposed to win. According to ESPN, the team was on a, quote, 44-game winning streak. And yet there I see the team, and there are 3 women standing, putting their hand across their heart, and then the whole rest of the team is taking a knee. I mean, how disgraceful, how disgusting. And when I saw that, I thought to myself, when I see athletes doing this, it's not that I'm going to boycott the Olympics, I'm not going to watch, but if I see American athletes doing this, I'm just going to be rooting for them to lose. And some people may go, Dinesh, well, aren't you, isn't that kind of anti-American to be taking a position against the American? No, it's actually pro-American, or more precisely, it's anti-American. In other words, these people are anti-American, so hoping for them to be defeated and humiliated. So I was actually cheering for the Swedish team. I mean, and the other thing about it is the Swedish team, I mean, they look so wholesome, they look so happy, they're patriots of their own country, they're and then you see this surly American bunch. I mean, it's enough to make you question your own patriotism, at least patriotism defined in this left-wing way. So I was thrilled when the Swedish team won 3-0, just kind of humiliating the Americans, and I hope there are more humiliations to come. There's also apparently a controversy involving the design of the American flag that is being used by the U.S. Olympic Committee. Now, the U.S. Olympic Committee has made it clear that it's not changing the flag this time, but it says that for the Tokyo Olympics, after the Tokyo Olympics, for the 2022 Winter Olympics, which is, by the way, in Beijing, they might redesign the U.S. flag so it doesn't have 50 stars, but it has 5 stars. What? What possible reason is there to do that? Now, it's not that you can't take the American flag and play with it to create a logo. The problem here is the reason for doing it. I realize political campaigns have manipulated the flag and the red, white, and blue, so I'm not outraged by the idea, but I'm outraged behind the sensibility behind it, which is, in a sense, to distance yourself from the traditional American flag, from the flag that went up at Iwo Jima, from the flag that motivated the boys at Normandy, from the flag that symbolized what so many people sacrificed so much for. This is the actual flag that they want to put some distance between themselves and this is what strikes me as utterly disgraceful. So all of this has introduced a kind of ambiguous element in the Olympics. We'll still see great sports, we'll still see great competition, but we can't in every case cheer for the American side, at least not when it is represented by a group of anti-Americans. If you're thinking of replacing your carpets due to pet stains and odors, I've got the solution for you, Genesis 950. The reviews are amazing. This is one product that actually works. Now, with water, it breaks down the bonds of stains and odors so they are gone for good. Its antibacterial component removes pet odors from carpet and padding. It can be used in a carpet cleaning machine, and it's green, so it's safe for your family and pets. Genesis 950 is made in America. 1 gallon of industrial-strength Genesis 950 makes up to 7 gallons of cleaner. But Genesis 950 is also great for bathrooms, floors, upholstery, And grease stains. Debbie uses it to clean the entire kitchen. When I got chocolate on my pan some time ago and on the couch, Genesis 950, boom, took it right off. Now, Genesis 950 has great customer service. Order 1 gallon direct at genesis950.com. You'll get a free spray bottle, free shipping, and a $10 coupon using the code Dinesh. That's genesis950.com. Coupon only available for 1 gallon purchase. Genesis 950. It's much cheaper than replacing your carpets or your pants or your couch. On the eve of the Olympic Games, I want to talk about a topic that is somewhat taboo, namely racial differences in sports, and particularly in track and field. We're going to be observing these. It's going to be blindingly obvious. And yet, there'll be very little media or public notice taken of it. It's almost like you will pretend that these don't exist or that they don't require any kind of explanation, and we will move on as if this is, quote, the most natural thing in the world. But it's not. Imagine if someone were to come from another planet and they were told, you've got these different racial groups in the world, and they're all showing up at the Olympics. You would expect these groups, which are all presumed equal, so to speak, to be performing equally in all the different sports. Sure, there'll be some variation, but the variation will be somewhat minor. Some groups will be a little better at this and not as good at that. And it may be obvious that the reasons for those differences are the fact that certain countries play certain sports. But the reason I want to focus on running is because everybody runs. You may say running is a level playing field because the earth, at least as far around us, is flat. It's not flat overall, but it's flat when you're running. And there is no natural advantage in one country being able to run, having better opportunities to run than another. This is not golf. This is not chess. We're talking about something that the whole world likes to do. Now, some people think, for example, that the Kenyans are really successful, for example, in long-distance running because, Kenya is a sport that loves running. The Kenyans are crazy about running. The Kenyans make heroes of their runners. And so this is the reason why the Kenyans are so successful in long-distance running. But it turns out that Kenya does have a national sport, and people are crazy about it, but it's not running. It's soccer. And I don't know if you've noticed, but the Kenyans haven't recently won a World Cup in soccer. I'm not sure if they've won ever. I doubt it. Kenyans are actually horrible soccer players as a group. They don't have much of a record of success in that area. So that doesn't seem to be a very good explanation. Now, I'm not merely trying to pin down why certain racial groups are successful in running. I'm going to talk about that. But I have a bigger fish to fry, as they say. And that is this. The premise of critical race theory, at least according to one of its leading apostles, Ibram Kendi, is that we would expect, in the absence of discrimination, every group to be performing, as he puts it, equitably. And so when you see racial inequity, which is to say some groups are doing better than others, so says Kendi, you can automatically assume that the result, the differential result, is due to racism. So racism here is defined not as malicious intention, not as using the N-word. It is merely inferred from racially unequal outcomes. So for example, if blacks are 13% of the population, but let's say only 4% of the medical profession, or 2% of the profession of geologists or astronomers, geology is racist. The profession of astronomers is racist. And the racism here, you can see, is derived from the fact that groups are underrepresented at the finishing line. Now, let's test this logic by looking at the field of sports. And in sports, we discover a massive overrepresentation of blacks, not only in the short distance races, but in the long distance races as well. Interestingly, African Americans and blacks of West African descent dominate the sprints. They dominate all the sprints, and they usually dominate all the positions in the sprints, first, second, and third. And this is why you have countries like Jamaica and Kenya that have just medal upon medal upon medal. Now, once in a while, you'll see a European sprinter, take second place in the sprints. And then you look and you see that even though the sprinter is British, you're talking about a black Brit, or you're talking about a black Frenchman. And so even when it comes to European countries winning medals, we're talking about blacks from different countries basically competing against each other. And the question is why? Now, there's been a kind of a debate. It's been a somewhat sub rosa under the surface, a debate over whether there is a sort of natural or genetic component to all this, or is it all the result of culture and maybe social expectations? I have in front of me a rather comical article from Axios. For Asian American sports, stereotype is the challenger to beat. So when you read the article, you actually want to laugh out loud, because it says that Asian Americans are underrepresented in the NFL, the NBA, and Major League Baseball. It goes on to say that the reason for this is stereotyping. Apparently, people have a kind of stereotype of Asians as being really academic and really nerdy and really smart. And the stereotype causes Asian Americans not to excel in basketball or baseball or American football. Now, let's apply this reasoning to see how crazy it is to me. Dinesh is kind of an intellectual. He's been reading books since he's really young. We have a stereotype of Dinesh as not being an incredible NBA player. And this stereotype is going to discourage Dinesh from going into the NBA and trying to dribble and pass and shoot hoops. And now we know why Dinesh is not in the NBA. It's the stereotype. Dinesh has internalized the stereotype of himself as an intellectual, and that's why he isn't playing, for the Houston Rockets. Really? Is that the reason? Or could the reason go the other way around? Dinesh is actually not that well built to play at the Houston Rockets. Dinesh actually has a relatively good self-understanding and recognizes that he may have better prospects in other fields like writing books and doing a podcast. So this is the lunacy with which we are dealing with when we are confronted with this issue. And then consider the other premise of critical race theory, that race is a social construct. Is that really true? If race is a social construct, how again do we explain the enormous racial discrepancies in a physical sport? Again, where it's not easy to infer cultural advantages. We're not talking about golf, again, where some people have golf clubs and other people don't. We're talking about running. And while it might be that poverty motivates people to run, run out of the ghetto, it is also the case that people who are not poor have better access to coaches, better access to training, better access to facilities. And so you would think that the sort of spur of poverty is more than overcome by the advantages of people who have. And then not to mention, look at the way that, say, the Chinese, the Japanese, these Oriental countries put enormous resources into Olympic success. And even still, they can't win the 100-yard dash. So it doesn't seem to be that the government's not investing in it and not putting enough resources in it. So what I'm getting at is that the whole premise that in the absence of discrimination, we will achieve proportional representation turns out to be a massive fallacy. You will see this fallacy played out day after day after day on the track and on the field. People will ignore it, but you shouldn't ignore it. Why? Because it is a kind of obvious and visual refutation of some of the absurd premises of the 1619 Project, of critical race theory, and the whole twisted, demented, upside-down way of thinking about race that comes from the left in this country. On July 4th, 1776, we declared our independence from taxation from a government an ocean away. Today, our government is the one imposing oppressive taxes. while at the same time sending our wealth overseas and driving the value of the dollar into the ground through reckless spending. Now, this is the time to declare your independence for your savings, cut your ties to the US dollar, and invest in gold and silver with Birch Gold Group. Now, if you haven't reached out to Birch Gold to diversify a part of your IRA or 401k into a precious metals IRA, do it today. Text Dinesh to 484848. You'll get a free information kit on protecting your savings with gold. I buy my gold from Birch Gold. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, countless 5-star reviews, and over 10,000 contented customers. Talk to them, have them help you safeguard your investments. Text Dinesh to 484848 to claim your free information kit and to speak with a precious metals expert on holding gold and silver in a tax-sheltered account. Again, text Dinesh to 484848. Have you heard of Black Rifle Coffee? This is a coffee company that has become very successful in recent years. It presents itself as a kind of an alternative, well, sort of a right-wing alternative to Starbucks. And Starbucks, of course, is kind of a feat, and you think of these Starbucks guys, and they all have this bohemian look about them. Well, Black Rifle Coffee patented itself and advertises itself with a kind of opposite image. Its image is military, it's veterans, it is tough guys. At one point, they had the slogan, "Premium roasted coffee for people who love America." It's sort of a red state concept, you might say. Now, most of this coffee is sold online, but they have had, an escalating growth. They've gone from being a tiny company to now doing tens of millions of dollars in business. Well, against this backdrop, I read a long article, 7,000 words in the New York Times, interviews with the sort of core team at Black Rifle Coffee, including the founder. And it's very disturbing because the guy, it turns out, is sort of a leftist. And he's talking about the Trumpsters, and he says, quote, "It's such a repugnant group of people." He's talking about the January 6th people in particular, but the Trumpsters in general. And he says that they have, quote, "kind of hijacked," end quote, his brand, as if to say that his own customers are making him look bad. He's embarrassed about the kind of people who are buying this coffee. He goes on to say, "I hate racist, proud boyish people. Like I'll pay them to leave my customer base." Now, first of all, the Proud Boys, whatever you think about them, are not racist. In fact, the head of the Proud Boys is this Latino guy, and they've got people of all races. So you may attack them for being nationalist, or they're too aggressive, or they shouldn't confront Antifa. But the one thing that's not accurate is that these guys are a bunch of bigots. And then, perhaps most disturbing, this Hafer character goes on to talk about the fact that he was considering having a coffee bag that had St. Michael trampling on Satan. And of course, this is a symbol that a lot of law enforcement people like, because St. Michael is a kind of patron saint of protection. A lot of military people use the symbolism of St. Michael. But says the Black Rifle Coffee guy, he goes, quote, he says, "But this symbol has now been embraced by white supremacists. And therefore," he says, "any plans for the coffee bag have been scrapped, quote, this won't see the light of day." And you can just see how the New York Times is like eating all this up, because they've got a guy who has in effect conned the right-wing base into buying his coffee. And think about the illogic of what he's saying. Let's say a handful of white supremacists love St. Michael. So what? First of all, this is a 2,000-year-old symbol. We're talking about one of the saints of the church that's going back centuries. It's been revered by people all over the world. So Michael is sort of the great opponent of Satan. Go read Paradise Lost. And so the idea that somehow the symbol is contaminated by its embrace by a handful of ragtag white supremacists is just downright crazy. So Black Rifle Coffee here has been doing this kind of over-the-top symbolism to appeal to conservatives, symbolism of veterans, symbolism of the military, and people fall for it. I think what it's a lesson to us that we've got to be a little careful before we jump behind these causes. We've got to sort of recognize who are the people doing this? What is their motive? And when you see an article like the New York Times, and this is kind of an eye-opener, you realize that these people are not only playing the Republicans, not only playing the conservatives, playing here in the sense of manipulating, but that they're privately guffawing about it. Now, they might say, well, we're smeared by the New York Times. But look, everybody knows what the New York Times is. If they call you and they're trying to get you to say things that bash the right, A, you don't have to be interviewed, and B, you don't have to say those things. But it's very clear that these guys, and there's a little portrait of them posing for the Times for their portrait, they're clearly eager to cultivate this kind of salivating media, even at the expense of their own customer base. And so I think our remedy is just to keep our eyes open about the kind of causes, particularly on sort of nationalistic grounds or patriotic grounds that we support, to make sure that they don't just share our symbolism, but that they actually share our values. How did you choose which internet service provider to use? The sad thing is most of us have very little choice because service providers operate like monopolies in the regions they serve. They use this monopoly power to take advantage of customers. They have data caps, streaming throttles, the list goes on. But worst of all, many service providers log your internet activity and sell that data onto other big tech companies or advertisers. Now, to prevent service providers from seeing my internet activity, I protect all of my devices with ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN is a simple app for your computer or smartphone that encrypts all your network data and tunnels it through a secure VPN server so that your service provider cannot see any of your activity. Think about how much of your life is on the internet. Sadly, the people you message, the sites you visit, the videos you watch, all of this gets tracked by tech giants who can then sell your information for profit. That's the reason I use ExpressVPN. I'm not all that computer savvy, but all you have to do is download the app, tap one button on your device, and you're protected. And ExpressVPN does all of this without slowing your connection. That's why it's rated the #1 VPN service by CNET and Wired. Stop handing over your personal data to service providers and other tech giants who mine your activity and sell off your information. Protect yourself with the VPN I trust to keep me private online. Visit expressvpn.com/Dinesh. That's expressvpn.com/Dinesh to get 3 extra months free. Once again, go to expressvpn.com/Dinesh. I want to talk about the Iliad, the great work by Homer, and the events of January 6th. Now, wow, you might say, what possible connection can there be between this Homeric epic and January 6th and its aftermath? But I think that if you think about the central plot of the Iliad, what got the Trojan War started, you'll see a kind of eye-opening similarity between what's been happening in this country this very year. Now, the reason that the Trojan War got started is that the Trojan prince Paris, who was invited by the Greeks in an act of hospitality, nevertheless seduces the wife of a Greek king named Menelaus or Menelaus, and carries her away with him to Troy. Now, the Greeks are furious, and as you probably learned in high school or maybe in college, the Greeks wanted to take revenge, and so they mobilized an army of 1,000 ships, and they launched an assault for many years against Troy that ultimately ended in the fall of Troy and the burning of Troy. But you have to look a little more closely to see that that's not exactly how it happened. It may seem, wow, the Greeks went to war because they wanted to get Helen of Troy back. Wasn't she the most beautiful woman in the world, Dinesh? She may have been the most beautiful woman in the world, and she might even have been the most beautiful woman to her husband, Menelaus. But Menelaus was not the supreme king of the Greeks. The Greeks at that time were divided into many kingdoms. And the leader of the Greek expedition was Agamemnon, the brother of Menelaus. So when Menelaus came to Agamemnon and goes, "You have to avenge what they've done to my wife. You have to go and launch an expedition against Troy." It turns out that Agamemnon saw an opportunity. In other words, Agamemnon went to war not to get Helen back. He didn't care about Helen particularly, but he wanted Troy, and he wanted a pretext to have a war against Troy. So another way to put it is that the Greeks themselves were the real looters here. They were accusing the Trojans of having looted Helen. You've stolen this beautiful princess. But in the name of correcting that injustice, the Greeks actually launched a much bigger war, a much bigger injustice, a much bigger form of looting. And I think that's the key to understand January 6th. January 6th was a kind of half-witted, in some ways misguided, passionate, but in a way intemperate and not very far-sighted attempt to hold these legislators to account. But the Democrats in it, just like Agamemnon, saw a huge opportunity. What if we turn this? What if we make this into an insurrection? What if we make this into some kind of act of terrorism or some kind of a riot, unleashing more mayhem than any time since the Civil War, if we are somehow able to magnify this incident sufficiently? However insignificant or modest it is on its own terms, we can use it to justify a widespread crackdown against our political opponents. In other words, if you think of our political opponents, I'm now thinking from the left and from the Democrats' point of view, as the Trojans. Let's go after the Trojans. Let's burn down the city of Troy. Let's take down all of them. In the name of correcting, remedying, and you may say avenging this one particular incident. And so the lesson, I think, the lesson both of the Trojan War and of January 6th, is that there might have been an original incursion, original injustice, but it is followed by the truly grievous incursion, the truly grievous injustice against our lives, our safety, and our liberties. For most of my life, I just thought a pillow is a pillow is a pillow. There's nothing really special about a pillow, but that's until I discovered Mike Lindell's MyPillow. And what Mike taught me is that a pillow, like a watch or a phone or a car, can be a work of art. These pillows won't go flat. You can wash and dry them as often as you want. They maintain their shape. They're made in the USA. For a limited time, Mike Lindell is offering his premium MyPillows for his lowest price ever. You can get a queen-size premium MyPillow for $29.98. It's normally $69.98. That's a $40 savings, and the king pillows are only $5 more. All the MyPillow products, by the way, come with a 10-year warranty and a 60-day money-back guarantee. You'll get deep discounts on all MyPillow products, the Giza Dream bed sheets, the MyPillow mattress topper, the MyPillow towel sets. Call 800-876-0227. Again, that number is 800-876-0227. Or just go to mypillow.com. Make sure to use promo code Dinesh. Hey, it's time for our mailbox, and haven't done a question in a couple of days, so I'm looking forward to this one. Listen.
Hi, Dinesh. Tom from Houston, Texas. I enjoy your podcast and listen to it daily. The question I had was, the current regime in Washington has decided to ignore many of the laws on the books, especially as related to immigration and protecting our border and our citizens. I didn't realize it was optional to disregard current laws and disregard the oath of office taken by all these people. I would appreciate it if you would spend a few moments and explain why there is no retaliation by anyone for what amounts to crimes against the American people. Thank you.
You know, you use a telling word when you use the word regime, because I think we are dealing here with a lawless bunch of people. This lawlessness started in some ways with Obama, and it's been accelerated by the Biden people. Now, they have a kind of paper-thin justification for what they're doing. They will argue that while Congress has the job of making laws and setting immigration policy, the Biden administration is in charge of enforcing those laws. And there is obviously a measure of interpretive discretion that goes into how you enforce a law. Now, to see what they're getting at and how they're corruptly manipulating this distinction between a law and the mechanism of its enforcement, consider the Trump administration's policy that if you want to apply for sanctuary or to come into the United States or to permission to enter, you can make an application and you're given a court date, but you stay outside the country until your court date. You stay in Mexico. You stay somewhere else. You can't be let in until you are authorized to be let in. The Biden administration has very slyly changed this. And so the reason we're getting all these people coming to the country, the Biden people would say, well, we're not making them legal, is nevertheless the idea that, hey, listen, we'll give you a court date, but we're then going to let you in. And we're just going to kind of hope and pray that you show up at your court date. But hey, if you don't show up at your court date, there's not a whole lot we're going to be doing. Basically, you can now stay in America. So they're using this idea under the guise of just making a change in the administrative rule. In other words, whether you stay in Mexico and then show up at court, or whether you stay in America and show up in court. They're using this, quote, minor change to produce a major effect. And the major effect is to let hordes of people in America whose whereabouts we no longer know, who are not going to be tracked down, who join the large hordes of illegals already in America. So is this unlawful? It certainly is against the spirit of the law. Most importantly, it's corrupt, because the reason they're doing this is not because they care about the children, not even because they care about the migrants. It is for crass political purposes that they're doing this. They're keeping in mind the long-term demographic shifts in America that they're helping to create. And they're hoping that they'll be able to harvest votes out of all these people to establish themselves as the permanent governing majority of America.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and SalemNow.com.